the enemy was actively developing plans to eliminate President Volodymyr Zelensky. One of the most important tasks of the Russian network was to find agents among the military close to the president, who could take Ukraine's head of state hostage and later kill him.
That was the spokesman for Ukraine's security service claiming to have uncovered a Russian plot to kidnap and kill President Volodymyr Zelensky and other senior military and political figures. Now, 2 officers in Ukraine's government protection unit have reportedly been arrested on suspicion of carrying out the plan, which was allegedly orchestrated by Russian intelligence agents. Now, these aren't the first Ukrainian claims of Russian assassination plots as the war stretches into a 3rd year. Zelensky said that in 2022 alone, there had been at least 10 attempts to take his life. And I'd now like to welcome John Herbst. He was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine from 2003 to 2006. After a long career in the U.S. State Department, he's now senior director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. Now, Ukraine's counterintelligence say they've uncovered a plot to kill President Zelensky and other high-ranking officials. How big do you consider the threat against Ukraine's senior leadership at this point?
I don't have particulars regarding this beyond what's already been put in the media. But I do know, as your report mentioned, that there were numerous efforts to get Zelensky by the Russian forces in the first 6+ months of their big invasion. And of course, they all failed. So this would be a major coup for Moscow were they able to achieve it. So certainly the claims are plausible.
And the 2 suspects are colonels in the State Guard of Ukraine, tasked with protecting top officials. Now, allegedly, they were recruited by the FSB before 2022, before the full-scale invasion launched by Russia. But with Zelensky well aware of the target on his head, how does someone like that make it into his security detail?
Look, the Russians have been indefatigable, going back to the first days of Ukraine's independence, going back to the early 90s, to make sure they have agents in its major positions across the intelligence and military and security agencies in Ukraine. That's one of the reasons why it was relatively easy for them to go into Crimea in 2014. But since then, going back 10 years, major efforts were made by Ukraine to fix this problem, largely but not entirely successful. And we know that Russia had success in South mainland Ukraine, taking Kherson at the beginning of the big invasion, because they had turned many of the Ukrainian intelligence officials in Kherson in their direction. So the notion that people relatively close to Zelensky even today are Russian agents is not a surprise. And I believe the Ukrainians are vigilant looking at this. That means they have some systems in place to prevent it, especially when it happens, but it's not foolproof.
And we've recently seen a big shakeup in personnel and some high-level dismissals in Ukraine. Can Zelensky trust the people around him?
I don't think that there's any doubt. The vast majority of senior officials in Ukraine are loyal to their country. They recognize that if Putin achieves his objective of having effective political control in Ukraine, there will be massive repression in free Ukraine comparable to the massive repression in occupied Ukraine. So they are fighting for their lives and their existence as independent Ukrainians. That does not mean, however, that there are not some Russian agents, whether by conviction or by subversion or by bribery.
How important is Volodymyr Zelensky personally to Ukraine's war effort, that struggle for survival as an independent country that you just mentioned? And what effect would it have if he were, in fact, assassinated?
Zelensky has been an absolutely brilliant war leader, and his unique qualities have been essential to the success Ukraine has enjoyed thus far. And I know people don't talk about Ukraine's success too often these days, but point of fact that they've stood off the world's either second or third greatest conventional military power for, 26, 27 months. That's a real achievement, even if it's not as strong a performance as some of us would like. Having said that, the Ukrainian people understand the point I've already made, that Moscow's aim is subjugation of Ukraine, which involves serious nullification of Ukrainian identity, which means Ukrainians who want to live in their own country as Ukrainians would be severely repressed. I believe it would be a disaster for Ukraine if Moscow were able to do something against Zelensky. I don't think it would be a mortal disaster for Ukraine.
That was former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst. Thank you so much for your time.